whole world witnessed a girl being possessed by a demon and two priests trying to cast it out, and it resulted in decades of seeing pure evil and nightmare in our lives. And right here in Films Unchained, we're here to summon the Exorcist.
The Exorcist, a 1973 horror classic, the only movie in that genre to be nominated at the Academy Awards for the Best Picture of the Year, starring Linda Blair, Jason Miller, Ellen Burstyn, and Max von Sydow. Directed by William Friedkin, the film set the bar for the horror genre. If you're a fan of horror films, that means you should be a fan of The Exorcist. Just to give you a quick story, I first watched this film back when I was in my undergraduate studies. I lived with my good friends Arthur and Al, where we lived at the opposite side of the cemetery. Fits well to our film talk, doesn't it? Arthur and I decided to watch The Exorcist one night after finishing one of our exams, the director's cut version to be specific. Now, can you picture the ideal setting, watching the film at night pitch black, living in the building at the opposite side of the cemetery? It was a unique experience, I gotta say. But just like The Shining, there were things about this film that have been making me go do research. That includes listening to the podcast Inside the Exorcist, where you basically learn about the nightmare of making the film, including a fire that took place during the production, the injuries that happened, and even how they auditioned and chose Linda Blair to play Regan. But I'm not going to dive in on what I've learned from it. I think you should give it a listen. It's a fantastic pod series. So I'm going to break down the movie with the story, the important elements, the symbolism and meanings behind them. We will also talk about certain scenes to basically understand the meanings behind them before we lead to what makes this film one of the greatest of that genre and possibly like the face of horror films. And this movie is worth watching, so I hope you don't mind me spoiling it for you unless you watched it, which is great. So let's get to it. The opening credits gave me the entire atmosphere that is expected throughout the movie. It started with the creepy, demonic, scary vibe, creepy noise of the violin, and all of a sudden it moved to the adhan, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, signifying that the demons fear God, because the adhan is a Muslim call for prayers, and the translation of the Arabic calling is God is the greatest, and it's been called 4 times in the title sequence. I was confused on how it transitioned from creepy to spiritual and peaceful, but it became one of my favorite movie intros. To some asking why they would use the adhan if the exorcism was performed by a Catholic priest or involved Catholic priests, I think it gives us the idea that evil is inescapable, whether Muslim, Jewish, or even Christian. In Iraq, the Catholic priest Marin was undergoing an archaeological dig before discovering the statue of the demon Pazuzu, with Marin being terrified by the look of his face as if he had history with it, seen horror with it, or even dealt with it. The entire sequence of Marin being in Iraq was different and had creepy moments here and there until he stood next to the statue of Pazuzu, kind of like a warning sent to Marin that they'll meet again in a potential confrontation, like a war that never ended. And with the strong wind, there's a strong meaning behind it. Pazuzu is known as the Lord of all fevers and plagues, and is known as the demon king of the wind in the Babylonian mythology, that brings food scarcity during dry seasons and locust grasshoppers during rainy seasons, which is why whenever he sees a statue, even the small piece of it, there's like the wind and the sounds of the bugs. The entire Iraq sequence was my favorite part of the movie. And then we move to Georgetown, where we get to see Chris McNeil as a famous actress living with her only daughter Regan. They have a nice, happy life together and have a loving community, especially with a group of celebrities and the director, Burke, the alcoholic. It seemed that they have a nice life together. But the beginning of the horror was basically Regan playing with a Ouija board at the house and calling her imaginary friend Captain Howdy. Why was there a Ouija board at their house in the first place? And why did Chris not do anything about it? Where was the supervision? I don't understand. And that led to basically over time, Regan getting a bit quieter, concerned, and even sinister. Things went loose, the walls break, the bed shakes, the room moves, Regan urinating on the floor, creepy sounds at night. And then when doctors had her undergo diagnostic tests, they found nothing. They can't explain her mannerisms and the foul language. Then her voice changed. And then we saw how she used a crucifix to, well, you know what happened, let's just say, stabbing her lower region. Her head rotates, attacked anyone she sees, especially killing Burke. The profanity done by Linda Blair at that age was way too profane. The reverse spider walk and puke was one of the most iconic and scariest moments in that movie. When Chris consulted with multiple doctors, specifically 88 doctors, they have no answer, with the thought of possibly a tumor, but yet nothing. And then one doctor gives Chris an option for Regan to go through an exorcism, even though the McNeils don't have any religious beliefs. But Chris had no other choice, and she asked help from Father Damien Karras, who was a struggling priest, as I'm just going to call it. He lost his faith in God after losing his mother, believing he was responsible for that, and because he was always away from her, and that broke him to pieces. Even though he's skeptical of supernatural forces since lost his way in the religion, he went to see the possessed Regan, and he was convinced that Regan was possessed after seeing scars spelling out "help me" on her stomach, and this led to the exorcism itself. Marin came to perform the exorcism with the help of Father Karras, and you can tell that Pazuzu dealt with Marin when the possessed Regan yelled, "Marin!" From that room specifically. And from the talks with the priests, Marin performed an exorcism that lasted several months and nearly killed him. And from the sound of it, I think that previous exorcism was dealing with Pazuzu. In a way, this would be a death warrant for Marin. The entire 19 minutes of the exorcism was as scary as it could have been. No music, no background noise, just Marin, Damien, and the demon. The green slimy puke, the profanity, the room shaking, the head twists, and this particular memorable scene that creeped me out when Pazuzu looked at Damien dead in the eye, sticking its tongue out like an animal and making the sounds. That was something else. It was scary. How can you not get scared of that? I still don't know how Linda Blair pulled this off at 13 years old. It's amazing acting. And also you got the famous scene of "the power of Christ compels you," which was said 14 times by both of them. Notice how Damien Karras is witnessing such horror and shock that there's a demon and evil is real. He doubted his belief in God until he saw the pure evil in front of his eyes. Throughout the entire process, the demon was manipulating Karras about his mother, using her voice to break him, making him responsible for her death, saying, "Why did you do this to me, Dimmy?" And Dimmy was basically a nickname that his mother gave him, and insulting him that his mother sucks, in hell, like trying to intimidate him. The idea is that the demon manipulates the human to look weak and be weak with his faith in God, to get angry, to get wrath, one of the 7 deadly sins. And remember, Karras was distant from his faith, which is why Marin was leading the exorcism. And it's been told that the best who performs the exorcism is the most religious, the most practiced, the one who has a stronger faith. Now, when Karras left and then re-entered the room, he found Marin dead. Not so sure if it was a heart attack or a dirty deeds of Pazuzu, because when you looked at the scene where the demon was giggling as a girl, of course it's scary, it shows that maybe that it was responsible for that. But remember, Marin performed an exorcism that lasted several months and that nearly killed him. So performing the exorcism itself was basically a game over for him. So Karras had enough of it and wrestled Pazuzu, inviting the demon into his body, unlike in many horror movies like Babadook, when that kid goes, "Don't let it in, don't let it in." But Karras let it in just for Regan to be safe once again. The guy who was struggling with his own faith ended up being the guy to get the demon out of the girl and trapped the demon in his own before throwing himself out of the window. And the unfortunate reason is that, mind you, this is just an opinion, is because he can trap the demon forever and would not be able to possess other people. So if he's in Karas's body and Pazuzu got nowhere to run anymore, like a life sentence with no chance in hell to get out. But recognize this, that Karas and Marin died at the end of the rituals. 2 priests died because of performing the exorcism. And apparently it comes specifically casting out Pazuzu. According to this publication, talks about anything involving monsters or supernatural forces called Simon Necronomicon. Pazuzu is the most fearsome of all entities. It takes the able one who can remove Pazuzu once he has laid hold of a man, for that demon lays hold onto death. So for someone to basically casting Pazuzu out of someone's soul, the catch is your own life. So it took 2 priests to get Pazuzu out, but that led to their own death. The war has finished, but no one won the battle, except for the victim, and that is Regan. Both priests signed their death warrant for exorcising that demon. No one came out of that incident the same in the end. No one knew what happened except for Chris, because Regan doesn't remember what happened to her or what she did when she was possessed. And they left the house for Los Angeles to walk away from that place forever, leaving everything behind. And that's the story of what's in the blue cold hell just happened in The Exorcist. Alright, now let's move on to the elements and meanings. Now specifically, I'm going to be talking about the curious elements and meanings, because we already covered the major symbols and meanings behind it, like in the story and discussing the plot itself, about Pazuzu, the winds, the exorcism itself, and the consequences. So who was the exorcist? It's best to start from there. We know from Google that the definition of the exorcist is the person who expels evil from a person or a place. Great. In other words, the one who gets the demon out. In the movie, Father Marin was leading the exorcism and is known for doing it throughout his experience as a priest. And he did not technically cast Pazuzu out of Regan. He started, led, and performed the ritual, but he didn't finish it. It was Damien Karras who got the demon out of Regan and succeeded after Marin died. So does that make him the exorcist in the movie just because he finished the ritual? If yes, this means that his faith in God was restored, especially after seeing such horror. The next one is basically earlier in the movie, when Regan's possession was only like the beginning. She gets downstairs in the living room where everyone's singing along with the piano playing music, and Regan looked at them in the eye saying that quote, "You're gonna die up there," before she peed on the floor. So that quote, "You're gonna die up there," this is where Pazuzu is taking control over Regan's body, and I think urinating on the floor is just a sign of fear from Regan, who's internally afraid and wanting to get out of there. Now, some say that she was saying this to the astronaut in a suit named Cutshaw, predicting his death in a space mission, hence saying up there. Now, that makes me curious, like, does the demon predict the future? Does he, see the future? Does he know, like, everyone's death? Like, it gets me all concerned, but I remember this quote earlier from Father Marin, where he says that, he will, like the demon, will lie to confuse us, but he will also mix lies with the truth to attack us. The attack is psychological. So I'm not so sure if Pazuzu's just basically saying that just because he's an astronaut and malfunction can happen, or is he actually predicting the future? That creeps me out. And the final curious meaning I'm trying to understand is Teresa. Now, in the director's cut, there's a scene that basically takes around 45 seconds where Marin asked Chris about Regan's middle name. She replied with Teresa, and he basically goes, "That's a nice name." I'm trying to understand the meaning behind that scene, whether it's the meaning behind the name or the person with that name, or maybe I'm just over exaggerating. I don't know, because why would they put that extra scene in there? But Marin said her full name, Regan Teresa McNeil, during the exorcism, like the original exorcism scene. If that was the case, they should have added that scene in the original release, because it is very important to understand that when you perform an exorcism, you state the full name of the person who is possessed, which is why when he says her full name and the demon gets annoyed and in agony as ritual goes through, it shows the importance of really understanding the victim. But what if it's the meaning behind the name, Teresa? To be honest, initially I thought, oh, Mother Teresa, because that's the only Teresa that, I've thought of during that time. But I think it was referring to Teresa of Avila, a Spanish Carmelite nun who was the author of spiritual writings and poems, known for her practice of visions and inner voices she experienced. Maybe I'm exaggerating about this one, maybe I'm not. Chris does admit that she and Regan do not stand with any religion. But now with the exorcism and Pazuzu, there's more thought into the name, just to add more value, saying that Saint Teresa is with Mary and Charis to cast a demon out of the little girl. But now the big question we're trying to understand, what is the movie about? And it's kind of strange to ask that question for a horror movie, but it's kind of interesting just trying to understand what it is about. From my perspective, pretty much the movie talks about faith. That includes the struggles, the strength, and restoration. And the concept of faith is portrayed with the three characters. You got Father Merrin, who is the ideal example of a pious religious man in the movie. And he performed the exorcism with patience and strength to his belief, avoiding the intimidation of Pazuzu. I mean, he dealt with the puke, he dealt with the insults, he dealt with, the tongue movements. We've seen that. He maintained his leadership in all of this, as if he did this 1,000 times throughout his priesthood. Then you got Damien Karras, who initially was doubting his faith, especially when he lost his mother, his only backbone and support in his life. Her death made him weaken his faith and walked away from worship, and that was his rock bottom. There are many people who go through such hard times and struggle to maintain their faith, and not just with faith, but hope, trust, courage, anything, in different shapes or forms. We have all been through something that could eventually break our patience and even peace. It can happen with, stressing out for an exam, and worst case scenario, if a person fails, or, trying to get into a university and get rejected, get into the army, but you couldn't, any kind of struggles. But when he realized that Regan was truly possessed, he went back to his belief and got back to his feet. In a way, it tells us that humans can get lost and even make mistakes. We're not all perfect, but, eventually we have the choice to get back up. And so what keeps us going is basically trying to trust ourselves and, trust the process to get back up, to get stronger after battle, after battle, after a battle. The third character, last but not least, is Chris MacNeil, who has absolutely nothing to do with religion at all. She mentioned that, answering the question, does she have any religious beliefs? She replied, no. She parties at night with music playing, singing with her friends. When Regan was slowly getting possessed, she thought it was a physiological or psychological issue. She didn't think of demon possession or bad luck or any superstitious situation. When she took her to the hospital to check on her, one of the doctors told her that she could consider to perform an exorcism on her. But Chris asked him, and I quote, "You're telling me that I should take my daughter to a witch doctor? Is that it?" It's like she thinks the entire thing is a myth or a joke and does not take it seriously. But in the end, she had no choice but to try the exorcism route because it was her only final option. Her initial lifestyle slowly fades away when she gets the spiritual wake-up call, as I like to call it, from the demon. It's kind of weird. And I think she left for LA because she also wants to leave the lifestyle she thought she'd be happy with. The fame, the money, the parties ended up being useless for Chris. Maybe she starts believing in God. Maybe she's moving on to a more peaceful life. I don't know. I'm ignoring The Exorcist 2 and 3 because I know it sucks. And I was recommended I should not watch it. So I'm going to keep it originally about this movie. If Chris doesn't have religious beliefs, why was there a cross used by Regan to stab herself at the lower body? I'm trying to understand that specifically. Ironically, at the same time, there's a Ouija board. I'm trying to understand because, I know, it's kind of like, the shoe fit so I can develop the story, but it doesn't make any sense. Why was there a cross and why was there a Ouija board? Speaking of Regan, she's the victim out of everything that transpired. What can you expect from a 12-year-old innocent girl? She ended up getting hurt by all of this and now traumatized by everything, whether she remembers it or not. I can't imagine the scars that she's been given by Pazuzu, and now she's gonna have to ask the questions to her mother, what just happened? But why Regan? Why did Pazuzu target a 12-year-old? Well, some say that she used a Ouija board to begin with and caused herself to be in that situation. Okay, that makes sense. But there might be another reason. Maybe the demon likes to attack innocents to show how far humans can go to destroy themselves, to destroy ourselves, to destroy the picture, the concept of humanity. And Father Marin said this quote, "I think the point is to make us despair, to see ourselves as animal and ugly, to make us reject the possibility that God could love us." If that's the case, that means like the demons want to attack the innocents. I think this is a test of faith. You're being placed in a position to ask yourself, where do I stand? Chris's only final option was to have the exorcism. Karras restored his faith when he believed that Regan was truly possessed. If you, in their shoes, witnessed a demon possessing your loved ones, or even witnessed an exorcism right in front of you, where does that make you stand with religion? What I love about The Exorcist is that there is no background music throughout the entire movie, no jump scares, no rubber masks, and no on-screen murder like many horror films. You got the thought, the build-up, and the act of horror in The Exorcist. It was way ahead of its time, and the movie continues to age very well. And it's crazy how, to this day, it is considered to be among the scariest of all time. I think this movie really got me more into watching horror films after The Shining. The Exorcist is the leading film of the horror genre, just like The Godfather is to the crime genre. Speaking of The Godfather, apparently Al Pacino and James Caan were considered to play Damien Karras, with Marlon Brando being among the many to play Father Marin. Mind you, the film was 1 year after The Godfather's release in 1972. But director Friedkin was concerned that it would be another Brando movie instead of being an important piece to make. And he made the right call with that. Plus, I can't imagine Brando performing The Exorcism. You can't take it seriously. I'm sorry, I can't. For Jason Miller, who played Damien Karras, this was his debut in acting, and he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Linda Blair was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in that movie. Honestly, it should have been Best Leading Actress since she was the star in that movie. We can't ignore the performance of Linda Blair as Regan and can never run away from her possessed demon face. Come on, we cannot run away from that. At the end, the film won the Academy Awards for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound Effects. It also received Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress to Blair, well deserved, Best Director to Friedkin, and Best Motion Picture Screenplay. The Exorcist was the highest grossing horror film until Stephen King's It in 2017, and it brought a huge cultural impact. There was this quote from New York Times critic Jason Zinoman said, on December 26, a movie called The Exorcist opened in theaters across the country, and since then all hell has broken loose. And what happened at every single theater since the film was released? People threw up at the theater. Some were victims of heart attack and even miscarriages, and others shuddered after watching it and leaving the theater. During that time, theater owners mentioned they've never seen a movie where people faint after watching it. Would you really be surprised? I mean, we're talking about the 70s, and it was a great era in filmmaking. I mean, like, you got The Taxi Driver, you got The Godfather, you got The Clockwork Orange, you got Barry Lyndon, you got Apocalypse Now. So many great movies in that era. You got moments that scared the hell out of people, if not disgusted them. Now, first and foremost, Regan's demonic scary face. Now, many, and I say many, use Regan's demon face as a pop-up to scare the hell out of people in games, websites, and even videos. I mean, we've seen that with multiple videos that occurred, especially on YouTube and America's Funniest Home Videos, reacting to those who fell into the trap, and we just see their reactions. I mean, many of us have fallen through that trap. If not Reagan's face, it's another scary looking face. Linda Blair is the center of that conversation, especially with the scene using the cross, stabbing herself in the lower body, and says, I won't say the whole thing, but you know what I'm talking about. The profanity and swearing she did, all of that was a mix of insanity, blasphemy, and horror. The other movie I can think of that was close to this at that time was Rosemary's Baby, but it did not involve a child doing all of this. And you got the spider walk that scared many of us, especially those who watched it in the theaters. Walking down the stairs fast with the build-up was just amazing and creepy at the same time. The spider walk itself was used in different movies like The Ring and The Unborn, but it's also used in pro wrestling. Now, in the WWE, there was a wrestler named Bray Wyatt who was very into horror films and one of the most creative people there. One of his moves in the wrestling ring, part of his cult sinister character, was doing the spider walk to haunt his opponents and playing with their head, walking slowly toward them before basically attacks them. If you write it down and watch it, it's creepy but super cool with how he does it. So whether it's in the movie industry, books, or even pro wrestling, it just shows how culturally important this movie became. And it really opened a lot of doors for superstitious, demonic kind of horror. I mean, I can't imagine without this movie how would it change or even alter the horror genre. And what's really interesting is that Stanley Kubrick and Alfred Hitchcock were candidates to direct the film, but they turned down the offers because they weren't able to produce it. I can't see Hitchcock directing movies with demons and priests and exorcism. But there's just one question I could not get an answer to, and that is, why did they release this film on Boxing Day? Well, that was a nice discussion for today's episode to summon The Exorcist on Films Unchained podcast. I actually enjoyed it, and this movie is one of a kind and a cult horror classic. I can't deny it is one of the best I've seen. I can't ignore Linda Blair's performance, and I cannot run away from the possessed face. It's gonna stick with me. I mean, it's gonna stick with all of us. I want to thank once again my good friend Arthur, who not only made me watch The Exorcist, but many horror films such as The Shining and It. Would I watch the film at the apartment opposite to the cemetery at night again? Hell yeah! I would do that in a heartbeat. And thanks so much to all of you listening to this episode. I definitely enjoyed this conversation about The Exorcist, and I also want to thank the band Amun-Ra. It was a crazy moment. I posted the announcement about The Exorcist, and the song that I used was their song Ogentrust, and it was crazy that one of the members of the band noticed it and liked it, and I just shared that in my story, and the band page liked it on Instagram. It meant a lot, so thank you so much. And once again, thank you everyone for listening to this. Don't forget to follow our Instagram page at Films Unchained Pod and Twitter at Films Unchained P for more horror films to break down. We got one more movie to talk about before our season finale on November, which will be revealed a few days after our next episode. Make sure to check out episodes 2 with Silence of the Lambs and episode 7 with The Shining, available on every platform you can find for podcast, only on Films Unchained.